Welcome to a new series of conversations I'd like to have about the nature of religion and digital technological culture. What these things mean, of course, is open to debate. The nature of religion has baffled us for millennia. What do we mean by the supernatural? What do we mean by God? You don't need to be religious to have an interest in this sort of conversation, because religion has been and remains at the very forefront of the most powerful forces on our species, determining how we think and how we live, determining laws and ethics. Religion is just incredibly important. And of course, as you well know, you're watching this on YouTube, technology has become, in a very short period of time, profoundly important, to the point that many of us are simply forced to be online in some meaningful respect, to do work. In the age of COVID, to do religion now is online, largely online. So I talk about religion and the digital ether, this mysterious digital realm that we experience the world through, screens that we experience the world through, because they're so important. And it's not clear exactly where these two things are going. What does it look like when the digital and the religious intertwine? Are they friends? Are they enemies? Are they strangers? What might the future hold? I will argue as we go through the series that, in fact, it's not just that these things are strangers, two ships sort of passing in the night, but that the digital and religion, the digital and religious, whatever those things might mean, overlap in essential ways. Views on immortality, a digital immortality of the soul, which was traditionally the domain of religion, the nature of good and evil, the nature of good character ethics. What it means to be a good person today is changing. If for no other reason, the anonymous nature of the internet has changed how people perceive of a good community, of a healthy community. So to begin, let's ask the obvious and surely very simple question: what is religion? And what we'll find almost immediately is that it's not a simple question. It's really quite difficult to answer. What do we mean by religion? Let me give you 5 reasons why you might want to study religion, whether or not you were raised in a religious home. I wasn't raised in a religious home, but 5 reasons why thinking about religion is important. The first reason is that for thousands and thousands of years, humans have wrestled with the concept or the idea of religion, the supernatural, spirituality. Many people today are put off by the word religion, so you could supplement the word spirituality. What is there behind the veil of reality, if anything? Is there a God, or gods plural? Is there a supernatural plane? Are they angels, demons, and such? Added to this very long history of investigation is the scholarship, academia, secular and non, about this topic. Number 2, for many people, a conversation about religion is about the mysterious, the exciting, the enticing. It draws us into thinking about metaphysical reality, ultimate reality, in a way that many topics don't necessarily. It's exciting, in other words, to think about what might be. Even from a purely secular perspective, just imagining how other people conceive and describe the universe, even if you disagree with them intellectually, it's fascinating for me. I don't believe in the Greek gods, but when I hear it or I see movies about it, it's fascinating to watch and to think about what might these Greek gods have really been like, or are like, depending on your worldview. So following on number 2 is number 3, that religion explains. One of the reasons that we have the different versions of the Greek gods that we do is that it helps to give an account of the universe and why things are the way they are. Again, for a very long time, humans have tried to understand the supernatural, but to explain the natural have appealed to the divine, divinity. I'm thinking right now of Aristotle, trying to make sense of the way the world works, the bios theoreticos. The ultimate life of contemplation was to think like the gods. The gods thought perfect thought, like math, these things that cannot change, that cannot be otherwise. And the greatest goal for humans was to live a life of contemplation, mimicking the gods as best we can, because we're not gods, but to try to think perfect thoughts as a plane flies overhead, very closely actually. Today we use the word theory as a means of explaining a world that we don't understand. We use the word in science especially, but that word theory goes back to this bios theoretikos, the theoretical life, from which we derive also the word theology. Theology is theos, logos, thinking about the divine. So now we have these connections very quickly. I know it's a bit wordy, between thinking about theoretical things to explain nature and thinking about the gods and the gods who think perfect things. And long story short, all of these things are a way in which humans have tried to understand. Religion is at the corner, theology at the corner of trying to understand. Number 4, now that the plane isn't bothering us. Number 4, religion heals. In the name of religion, in the name of the divine, in the name of gods, people have done untold, amazing things. From charities to self-sacrifice. The call of religion has often been within communities to sacrifice oneself for a greater good, to conceive of the greater good of one's community. We don't necessarily need religion for that kind of ethical compass, but it has traditionally been religion that tries to heal. And number 5, of course, is that religion also kills. One of the big reasons that people don't pay attention to religion, I suspect, is that they are well aware that in the name of religion, much blood has been spilled. Many lives have been taken. And it's not just the terrorists, it's not just ISIS. Christianity has a history of every world religion, has a history of violence. And they do these things in the name of their religion. And for anybody who sees this, of course, especially if you're on the receiving end of this violence, it discredits that religion. But whether or not you think religions are discredited, they're still worth thinking about, if for no other reason than that they continue to cause bloodshed even now, and also to heal, and also to explain, and also to entice, and also to give us an understanding of how the world might work. For all of these reasons and far more, we should think about religion. As an entryway into the conversation, there are 4 terms we should talk about. The first is theism. Theism is the view in some kind of personal divinity, that the divine or divinities, plural, want to have an interaction with us. They're not, for the deists, as an example, they're not, or it's not, just a spiritual thing that's off in a corner and kind of ignorant of us. Theism says that religion is about a living dynamic with some kind of spirituality. So theism, monotheism as an example, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Monotheism believes that God wants to have some kind of interaction, whether that's through prayer or ritual, sacrifice, all kinds of different interactions that might be important to people's lives. Theism. By contrast, a theist would be the atheist. That is the person who denies any such possibility of an experience. They may deny that there's a supernatural. They may deny that we can connect with that supernatural. Generically, an atheist says there is no supernatural divinity behind the scenes of things. So we have the theist, personal God of some kind. Atheist, no such thing. But there's, of course, wiggle room in all of this. The agnostic comes along and goes, well, I don't really know. And you know what? I don't think you can know either. We can't say yes, we can't say no. There's this, not a dismissiveness per se, but a refusal to commit by saying that no one can know. To be agnostic, agnosis, to be without knowledge. You cannot know. So I can't be an atheist and tell you that you're wrong, and I can't be an atheist and tell you that you're wrong. So I'm going to be an agnostic and say, you can't know, nor can I. Whether or not science can prove it, no. We're all in the same boat here. I'm agnostic. Whether you admit it or not, you should be agnostic too. Closely associated with agnosticism is the idea of skepticism, and depending on who you are and how you want to frame these things, they amount to basically the same thing. A lack of knowing. But in terms of skepticism, it's often a systematic sense of doubt, that I apply doubt so that I can know something more. I'm constantly doubting in the pursuit of greater clarity or greater understanding or knowledge in some way. So I can be a religious skeptic, and maybe I don't subscribe to a theistic perspective, but I'm still interested in supernatural or religious things, and I'm skeptical of them, but I'm pursuing them, and I'm not just saying it's impossible, so I'm going to walk away from the whole deal. I hope that terminology helps you situate your own belief system along that spectrum of theism to atheism and skepticism, agnosticism. A lot of isms there. Let's add to that content a little bit. In this series of conversations, I'm going to assume a monotheism, a one-theism point of view. That's basically, there are others, but Judaism, Christianity, and Islam comprise the vast majority of religious population in the world today. So to answer the question, what is religion? I'm going to assume, at least tentatively, that it refers to a monotheistic conception, a personalized, probably one type of divinity, just to help narrow the ballpark a little bit. And then I can begin to look into some of the terminology. So here's some of the interesting terms with monotheism to get us thinking about what might the divine be like. Traditionally, the divine has been this. The divine is said to be infinite, without end, infini. In Exodus, God is said to refer to himself simply as I am that I am. You don't try and pin me down. Don't try and pigeonhole me. I am that I am. God is without confine, without definition, which makes it very difficult then, of course, to talk about the divine. But God is infinite. That's a spatial metaphor in many ways, so let's try not to get caught up on that too much. But immediately, the very term that I try to use to describe God, we've run up against this profound, mysterious notion that God cannot be understood because God is infinite. Do you understand infinity? Maybe you have a generalized understanding of the mathematics of infinity. That's different. This is saying that from the beginning, in the monotheistic conception of the divine, that God is beyond understanding, which is terribly frustrating. But let's pretend that's not the case and continue on anyway. For monotheists, aseity, A-S-E-I-T-Y, aseity is very important. God depends on nothing. God is before creation. God is before time. God is before food. Whatever God is, God's not something like you and I. I rely on food. I rely on family. I rely on gravity. I rely on air. God is different than all of these things. So God is infinite, without definition, without confines, without taking up space. God's beyond space. And also God is said to be, again, for monotheists, aseity, dependent upon nothing. There are three others that are very important to monotheists. The idea that God is creator, that God created everything that is, God being uncreated, so it makes it very difficult to talk about. But that also God, as for monotheism, is that personal connection again. It's not just that there's this distant thing without confine, without limit, without definition, but that strange, mysterious force nonetheless wants to be connected to us in some meaningful way. It's not a deistic perspective where God just created and then left. God still wants connection, which means things like all-loving, a beneficent God, become very important. Because if God was a cruel or an evil God and wanted to have interactions with us, maybe some of the Greek gods come to mind in that, then that would be problematic. So what do we know? Infinite, aseity, creator, but also loving and wanting to have some kind of relationship with us. Well, that's quite a list right there. That's just a profound amount of things to think about right there. And in fact, I have spent the last 2 decades thinking about these kinds of topics. It's fascinating. What might there be, but also, if there is something out there, if there is a thing or a being, creator, is it a good thing? Maybe it's kind of a jerk thing? Who knows? If we accept that monotheistic terminology up front, it's no wonder then that religion is so influential, because this idea of the divine will very much condition how we do ethics, how we do politics, how we create laws, how we think of value, how we imagine other people having worth, how we think of creation. Because if this stuff right here was created by the divine, and I come in here and I steamroll it and put in a parking lot, I might be pissing off God. And if that's the case, that's a bad thing. So this initial terminology then becomes very influential for how we think about pretty much everything. All right, so you've probably noticed that I haven't answered the question, what is religion? I've given you some fancy terminology, some head shaking, what the heck might that possibly mean terminology, aseity, infinite, what? Okay. Well, let me try and outline some basics that traditionally have worked for many people. Number one, religion might have something to do with this. I know you'll be surprised, but belief. Right? Belief. Okay, you're not surprised. By belief, I mean cognitive assent or intellectual stuff, something maybe knowledge-based. I can write it out on a piece of paper. I believe this. So if I'm a monotheist, maybe I'm a Christian, I believe in the Trinity. I believe that God's three persons in one. If I'm Jewish, I believe this. If I'm Buddhist, I believe that, and so on. I can write it down on a piece of paper. My beliefs are something I can express, and I can use human language typically to describe it. You won't be surprised, of course, that libraries are full of books on people's beliefs, what they think is the case. Scientists have beliefs too. Physicists have beliefs too. Not necessarily in the supernatural, but in that which they can't necessarily, dark matter, dark energy, dark flow, these principles of the universe that they believe exist, but are having a very hard time demonstrating in the lab are actually there. So there's a belief system of what we think. Faith is a harder word to nail down. It's not just that faith takes over where beliefs stop. So where my beliefs become less and less credible or less and less objective or less and less real, then faith takes over. I don't think it's that simple. When I think of faith, I think of openness to the unknown, a belief or a willingness to hold oneself open beyond just belief. So if I have a list of beliefs and written them down and something new comes into my life that challenges those, I believe faith is that mechanism or that approach, that experience in which I remain open to changing my beliefs. Faith, for some, however, is a very rigid, very strong belief, and it gains its credibility by being very strongly devoted to something in the face of any new truth that may come, in the face of any kind of challenge. A belief that I have this particular kind of truth, and it doesn't matter what I see or what happened, I'm going to hold on to this bit of truth. I'm not sure, for me personally, that articulates that life of faith. And I can experience this with other people. So imagine having a conversation with a neighbor. Maybe I disagree with my neighbor. He says that the lot line goes this way. I say, I know the fence should go here because the lot line goes that way. I can insist on my belief over and over and over again to the point where we simply no longer agree. Or I can try to have faith and a belief that we can reconcile our views, that we both believe in two sets of truths that seem to be mutually incompatible. But I'm going to step back and I'm going to try to live as if there's some middle ground or some relationship that can still be had despite the disbelief or the disconnect in belief. Now, as I said, faith is quite hard to nail down, and what that will mean, of course, for you will be different from me. Traditionally, it's been the belief in things unseen or unheard, a belief in a promise, belief in a world that we don't or we can't have evidence for. But unfortunately, with many fundamentalist kind of ways of thinking, it becomes an excuse to say no to the obvious. It becomes an excuse to hate people and harm people based on a belief that is contra reality. But that's a different conversation. So religion is belief. Okay. Religion is faith. Okay. Religion is also about moral action, knowing the right way to be. This is one of the most powerful drivers for how we think about ourselves. Religion, whether I'm a good person, ethics, what is the good life? You won't be surprised when I say religion is about ritual. Many religions have many different kinds of rituals. I grew up in a home that was secular, humanist. I didn't really understand rituals. The more I began to learn about religions, the more fascinating these different rituals became. And I was able to see how each one of these different kinds of rituals was another way of making sense of the universe and the spiritual. And that rituals weren't just empty things, but that they had a meaning. They had a meaning, a reflection of theology, a reflection of what it means to be a good person. It's a ritual. Essential theme for many is that religion has to refer to the transcendent, that which is beyond creation. And one of the keys for connecting that to human life and human understanding is revelation. So often, to be a religion, you have to have some kind of book or sacred literature in which a truth or a knowledge is revealed that connects us to the divine, or divinity, plural. What that might mean for you, depending on your culture, will be quite different. For some, it can be simply a clay tablet. For others, it has to be pages of like the Bible, pages and pages of documents written over many, many, many years by many different authors. And traditionally, religion has been about worship. Again, it'll look different depending on the culture and your community, but worship is a reflection of your belief in the transcendence and how you approach it. That worship is also a part of ritual, so there's some overlap there. But worship, music, liturgy, communion, sacrifice, feeding your gods, the statues, the representation of your gods, all of these different things could be called worship. The first part of this conversation has been what I would call analytic. That is, I've given you some terms and I've tried to define them, giving a little bit of theology, maybe a little bit of history in there. But what if all of that is a way of confusing the issue? What if religion isn't about putting labels on things, isn't putting about names on things? I mean, that's part of it, no doubt, but to really begin to understand religion, maybe what we need is what Paul Tillich, a famous 20th century theologian, says, is to think about our ultimate concern. Maybe it's that simple. What is religion? Well, what is your ultimate concern? What is most important to you? What is the most valuable thing to you? If it's money, that's your religion. If it's sex, drugs, rock and roll, religion. Maybe it's a combination of all of these things. Tillich argues that we get caught up in trying to make our symbols and our religions literal. We try and nail them down by using the terminology, the kind of things I just talked about. We try and make those things so absolute that we can control them and dominate them. I said, whoa, slow back, or step back, slow back, that's new. Step back a little bit and think about it. What is your ultimate concern in life? Then that's your religion. Religio, in the Latin, to bind, to be bound to. What are you bound to? Now that seems to lack a supernatural inclination. That seems to be, in a way, it seems too narrow too. I don't think that's his intent. I think he's trying to be broad so that we open up our horizon and we realize that maybe the faith we think we have, maybe the belief system we think we have, is in fact what he would call demonic, too rigid, too literal, and it doesn't open up new access to reality, new layers access to reality. For Tillich, religion opens us up to these new layers. It gives us a new sense, a new perspective, a new scope. God, he says or believes, is the ground of all being. Everything else we say about God is symbolic and non-literal because we can't pin God down. So why would we think we could pin religion down? So we need to think in more general sense. What's my ultimate concern? Closely related with Tillich's view of ultimate concern as a basis for thinking about or experiencing religion is Rudolf Otto's conception of the Mysterium Tremendum. So Rudolf Otto's famous in religious studies, talking about this thing called the numinous consciousness, this thing that in each of us exists, or a mechanism in all of us that exists, by which we can experience the transcendent, what he called the Mysterium Tremendum. That's terrible mystery, but terrible in a way that's fascinating, that draws us in, like a roller coaster ride draws us in. It's terrifying to go on a roller coaster, but that's why we want to do it. It's this leading towards this idea of experience. What is religion? It is based in experience, not in a cognitive labeling. Again, the labeling is important, the terminology is important, the theologies, thinking about these different, very important. But ultimately, to answer the question, what is religion? It's something that needs to be experienced. That is problematic. If we want to do a secular study of religion, and we're doing it from the outside because we ourselves are not necessarily participating in the religion, that makes matters convoluted. But in the very least, let's pretend we're all secular humanists for a moment and we're not religious in any way, we're not spiritual anyway. We can still get close. We can still get close, we can still be engaged in that fascinating conversation about what religion might be, but ultimately to answer the question, what is it? We would have to engage our ultimate concern, and for people like Rudolf Otto, we would have to engage our own numinous consciousness of that terrible mystery and experience it firsthand to answer the question, what is religion? For me, a conversation about the digital ether, technology in an intersection or interrelationship with religion begins with this kind of thinking about experience and how we experience the world. Is there a terrible mystery, an enticing mystery about the digital, traditionally, as we saw with religion and the divine? Is there a new ethics being created, a new sense of law and order being created that traditionally was religion, now is a response to the digital? I think the answer to all of these things is yes. So what is religion? I don't know, but I think we're headed in the right direction. We're going to narrow our focus a little bit. Again, we're going to assume a monotheistic conception for our purposes in this series. And what is the digital? Well, stay tuned. We're going to try and figure that out next.